But let's get going right away. We have our last, keynote speaker before our wrap-up from Alex. Let me welcome back onto stage John Kissane, Chief Strategy Officer and General Manager of the Cloud Business of NetApp. Sir, you did a super job on the panel. Knocking dead.
Thank you very much. Do I need the clicker?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me back. And I'm excited to be here. I think clearly the digital transformation, the digitization of industry is creating quite a buzz, and there's lots to talk about with it still, believe it or not. It was the #1 topic at the World Economic Forum in Davos in terms of business topics. And every day, as we've seen, there's a lot of exciting technologies coming our way, and yet this can be a little bit overwhelming. So what I'm going to do first, as I'm a student of history, I'm going to help us pause and go back a little bit and think of a story from the 9th century, China. 9th century China, they invent gunpowder. And it's not reliable, it's not consistent, not really that powerful at that point in time. And so what needs to be done? 13th century, it spread far beyond the reach of China, and it's reached Western Europe. And the Europeans do something a little different. They create it in a paste in the manufacturing process. So the sulfur, the charcoal, the saltpeter is evenly distributed. And it's quite mixed, and it stays well mixed. So it's portable, transportable, consistent, and it's 4 times more powerful because it has a consistent punch. So the Western Europeans borrowed something and improved upon it. So then we move forward a little bit more, and Europe really still hasn't figured out this technological advancement stage. They're in the dark ages still. So they're not really inventing much. In fact, they're spending most of their time either attending church or building churches. So they get advanced in one particular area that's world-class. It's the casting of church bells. So this is really going to change the face of the world because church bells and these bronze castings all of a sudden get transformed into a skill set that is valuable in creating cast cannons. Cannons, previous to this time, would have a tendency sometimes to explode on the army members that were trying to load the cannon or fire the cannon. And so it was doing just as much damage on the armies that were using them as their targeted foes. So instead now, we've got another breakthrough with cast cannons. And then the last piece of this story, and I should reference John Steele Gordon as the financial historian that helped piece this together, is the lateen sails. These were developed in Persia and in the Eastern Mediterranean around the 13th century, and they made their way to Western Europe as people bought these ships and started to recognize the value of these sails. If you're a sailor out there, you know that Europe up until this time just had these cog sails, and all you could do is sort of go where the wind sort of took you. You weren't as able to navigate with agility and speed and position your boat or go and tack into the wind very aggressively. So they borrowed, begged, improved upon, and put together something that had an incredible big impact finally. This combination, these 3 ingredients, created the man of war. The man of war changed the Western world. 3 countries that formed in that time, England, Spain, and Portugal, ended up having disproportionate influence over the entire Western Hemisphere, claiming vast amounts of territory, having control over the seas. And none of these technologies were really invented in Western Europe. They selected them, they saw connections, they improved upon them, and created a very powerful combination. This story is a great example as how you can leverage technology, some of which you already have sitting around in great capacity, and turn them into a great technological advantage and a business victory. So we're going to take this theme forward and think about, well, we should be making combinations then. Let's go all out and make combinations. We're technologists very often, and we love to do that. I'm an engineer at heart. But that's not the lesson we should take away here, because there's meaningful risk still in making some of those combinations. And in fact, we can choose things that seem to be delicious ingredients on their own and put them together and make something that's really nasty. You know, hot dogs are popular in the US, ketchup's popular in the US, peanut butter, bread, they're all great things, but I don't think I have many takers out there for this culinary delight up here on the left. So sometimes you gotta be careful with those combinations, but sometimes really good combinations become quite popular. The chocolate and peanut butter classic now. Millions of people enjoy this probably every week. And so it's not necessarily inventing something entirely new, but getting that attractive combination. So if it's really just getting that precise combination, why are people attempting all these other combinations that aren't working out as cleanly? Is it their taste preference? Is it adventure, just pure creativity? I think it's the fear of being left out, especially in technology. Because missing out on a critical technology can be fatal, and increasingly more so in these last decades. People don't want to see themselves as not being forward-thinking or embracing that change, and so they quickly put together a recipe in the kitchen, clanging pots and ingredients all together. And we face a time now where there's enormous data growth, as we talked earlier, faster technological change than we've seen before, and so this is a legitimate fear. And in fact, Richard Foster from Yale did a study, which is the chart on the left. And if you look about a century ago, if you were in the S&P 500, long ago in the 1920s and 30s, all the way up through the 60s, you could have a life expectancy of 6 or 7 decades of being a S&P 500 company. Well, that's changed dramatically, and this chart has come down quite aggressively. And in fact, now, you have maybe a lifetime span expected of 15 years. That means every 2 or 3 weeks, a Fortune 500 company is spinning out of the S&P 500 totals. Someone has them in their crosshairs and is knocking them off that chart. And so now it looks like by the time it's 2027, maybe only 75% or so of the S&P 500 companies we have today are going to be knocked off, and 25% will be left, and the others will be replaced. So this fear of being left out, the fear of missing some technological wave, these logos here are not meant to indict these companies. They're worldwide known brands and companies, but there's a belief that they've missed some part of a wave, whether technological or business imperative. And that shift proved to be something that knocked them off that pedestal. And probably near the end, they tried every recipe they could think of, but it was probably, frankly, too late. So when we have to make this choice of these recipes to put together, I always go to my spiritual and intellectual leader, my own sort of yogi, my Yogi Berra, that is. Yogi Berra, famous world-class baseball player in the United States, New York Yankees and Mets fame, among others. And he said something that almost has become a technological mantra, which is if you have all these technologies laying out there and the choices of ingredients, what should you do? Well, if there's a fork in the road, take it. What does that mean? That's another one of those head scratchers that Yogi put out there historically. I love his quotes, but boy, they can make your head hurt. Because does this mean that I should make no decision and stand there in paralysis? Or should I just do all of them, right? This captures this challenge in adopting technologies. So I think this really has become much more accelerated today because there's more and more choices. And so what it creates in many organizations is what I call the shiny object syndrome, SOS. Because we realize that we can't pick them all, and yet if we act in paralysis and don't pick any, it's also just as likely to lead to an inferior outcome. And so if we make a choice and we put together some mixes that don't work, we've really lost time, energy, and resources going against more fruitful objectives. So it's not just the dollars that are lost or the people time, but it's the opportunity cost of really focusing in on a combination that can make extremely valuable impact to our businesses, our internal customers, their customers. And so there is a risk. We don't want to discourage experimentation, but experimentation just to make a new recipe in the kitchen, we want to get to a recipe that tastes good. We want to get to something that has economic impact and will deliver an ROI to our constituents and our customers. So the times of just pure experimentational R&D, and I come from Silicon Valley, are limited. We need to get to an impact. So I will take you to a more modern story than the Man of War, and instead take one that probably should be very familiar to this room given the conversations we've had. It's one that begins with Google Maps. So 11 years ago, actually more like almost 20 years ago with the internet, you had maps starting to come up. And people like that because it's fun to know where you are or you think you are or where something should be. But Google Maps did it differently because they published an API. And the API enabled other people to build and take advantage of the knowledge that was captured, the data that was captured in the maps. So that's the first piece of this modern recipe. The second piece, smartphones. Can't believe, but it's less than 10 years that the first version of this came out, the iPhone. They didn't call it the iPhone 1, but they probably knew many more were coming. The iPhone came out in 2007, and what a success it's been, right? This last quarter, they had a little bit of a down bump, but the quarter before, 75 million of them sold in one quarter. And if you think that's a lot, there's over 300 million smartphones that were sold during that quarter. So you look at the year, 1 billion smartphones. And the interesting thing is, if there's anyone under 30 in this room, right, back at that time, the big names were Motorola, Nokia, BlackBerry. They are great companies, but they suffered this inflection point that we talked about. They went from being masters of the universe to where, the Android and iPhone have taken the lion's share of the market. So this is the second piece of the recipe, and it offered us apps that we could take with us. So you not only have maps, and maps that you can create new applications with, but you can take these apps with you wherever you want to go. So then the last piece of the recipe, a great invention in and of itself, over a century ago, the limousine, the car, the automobile. And so this is something of which there was an abundance of, enormous amounts of assets into the marketplace, just like the bells from the churches that were being cast. But it seems like they're underutilized. And so 6 years ago, a couple guys found them just too hard to track down and find and use. So 4 years ago, they launched a new service that we all know that doesn't rely on really much strong intellectual property that they developed themselves. They don't own the assets in the cars, and they don't own the hardware in the phones. It's Uber. We all know this brand name. In fact, I've taken two of them this week. And what did they do, those 5 years ago? They went to every venture capitalist. And if you look on the web, this week, there were publications of the rejection emails that they got and Airbnb got. It was interesting. $11 million Series A, valuing them at the steep price of $60 million for a company that has almost no assets, no IP, no software, relying on all these other parts of the ecosystem. Right now, you probably all know, $60 million with an M is now valued at approximately $60 billion with a B. And their last round was about $2 billion. Benchmark had great insight there. So like this earlier example we had with the Man of War, it's not so much the inventing. There is an incremental element of inventing. But it's also choosing and carefully putting together the recipe. They leveraged iPhones, borrowed maps, tapped into existing limousines and drivers that were everywhere, and tapped into a latent need for individual consumers like us. So where does this take us? Instead of turning to Yogi Berra for our inspiration, we should turn to a true intellectual, Charles Darwin. It's being the most adaptable to change. Survival isn't being the biggest or the strongest. That's not going to last forever. It's being the most adaptable to the change and the change that's happening in the environment, and putting together the right pieces to help you be successful going forward. And in fact, there is meaningful room for invention. Don't get me wrong. There are areas like fundamental physics and foundational R&D, but commercial success is not always directly linked to those in the immediate term. And yet, pulling together the right ingredients in and of itself can be extremely valuable. So we should be able to look to the future, right, and predict how this works out. We all have our crystal balls, right? I've lost mine. Maybe I can borrow one from one of you. Mine wasn't really working that well, so I probably misplaced it. And this is not uncommon. In fact, there's a study by Daniel Gilbert of Harvard, which he calls the end of history illusion. There are 3 parts to it that I want to share with you. And the first part is, most people like you and I have a hard time believing that everything in the past hasn't led to a perfect state for today. We understand what happened, and we understand the steps that took along the journey, but when we get to today, it sort of seems perfected. It's in a state that, why can't it just stay this way? And in fact, even with things that are so personal to us that only you would know the answer to, most of the people in this longitudinal study found that they really changed themselves a lot. The people they thought that were their best friends, they thought they were going to be their best friends a decade later. The music they like, they thought that was going to be their favorite music 2 decades later. And yet when checked in over time, people do change and their preferences change. And it's hard to predict who you will be in the next decade or two. So it's got to be harder to predict things outside your personal world. And second, when things change outside your personal world, we often say, okay, it's going to be linear. It's going to change just a little bit here and there. And it doesn't happen that way either. And it happens more on a exponential growth and a compounded growth type factor. And the human mind has a hard time dealing with that. In fact, that's why most people really don't contribute in their retirement funds, according to some studies, because they have a hard time projecting of how a small contribution today every week is going to add up to be something meaningful. And yet the power of compounding allows it to double over mere years and over decades grow significantly. The third part of this end of history illusion comes from combinations then. So we just went through combinations. We thought we could get great combinations. But the human mind has a very hard time thinking of the combination of events that are going to unfold into the future and actually have the biggest impact. It's extremely, extremely difficult. So in this context, we have to be flexible in how we think about our technology. And we have to be flexible about how we think customers are going to evolve. And that makes it all the more challenging because there's a lot of independencies that occur there. There's an apocryphal story that many of you have probably heard with the invention of the first mobile phones out of AT&T's Bell Labs at the time, and how many of these would be needed, right? Was it 1 dozen, 2 dozen? It was certainly less than 100 in that initial study that they thought would be needed worldwide. And there's 1 billion shipping. Yes, laugh away, please. 1 billion shipping each year now. So others have forecasted we'd be off of petroleum by now, right? Or we'd already have our Star Trek computers that allow us to talk to them and do a much better job than Apple Siri or Amazon Echo. We'd have our flying cars, our robots that would cut our hair. We'd have another fleet of robots that would make our beds and serve us breakfast, like Wallace and Gromit. But that's not playing out exactly, or it's taking a lot longer, and these combinations aren't coming together in the way we thought they might. So I would pose to you just a little exercise. What will come first? The majority of cars in California being self-driving, the majority of reconstructive surgeries, including 3D printed body parts, or better yet, the entire disappearance of handwriting, because we can use keyboards and voice recognition, and why would we need to write? It's hard to say. But the explosion continues to come, and we know going in the future there's exactly an enormous amount of change coming. These numbers are all wrong, but I tell them to illustrate. On the left, some say 20 billion connected devices by 2020, end of the decade. Others say 60 billion. On the right, whether that's a 1.7 or $2 trillion worth of industry around Internet of Things, it's going to have big value impact. But the one that strikes me the most, again, is data usage. 40 zettabytes, right? Let's see if I can do this on stage, because everybody's brain sort of collapses on stage. You got bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes. 10 to the 21 bytes. There's only 10 to the 75 particles in the universe. 10 to the 21 bytes. Mark Lieberman of the University of Pennsylvania believes that 42 zettabytes captures every utterance ever voiced by any man, woman, or child who's ever lived on the face of this earth. It's a boatload of data. And so I think data is going to be the core of this. Data is the lifeblood of business. Data is not just going to be the explosion, it's the gold mine. And let me help you just do a mental exercise here. Data is so important that I would argue, what happens if you lose your data for your scale of businesses? It's gone. There's not a backup, there's no copy, there's nothing. You don't have your customers' names, their addresses, their billing accounts, the reps that call on them, their purchase histories, the prices for your product, the inputs for your products, the manufacturing recipes, your financial records, your HR records, your employee payroll. You have none of that data. Your business is toast. You could have a building burn and fall down and get insurance payment and build it back. You can have a team of really important engineers leave your company and go to a competitor. You can have a network server go down, or you can have individual pieces. But if the entire data set disappears, that is practically the lifeblood of your business. That's how I look at it. So I think there's 3 frameworks that help us think about this digital transformation, especially related to how data is at the primacy of this. This first one I call sort of the subway metro system. We talked a little bit about this morning about the importance of customers, the importance of data. And yet, I think it's really hard for us to think and engage because we have layers of people and things between us. Right? If you have an IT team that's responsible to a line of business who has a sales team that calls on customers, and inside those customers there's another constituency that actually has the need that's satisfied, it's hard to get there. But I break it down into the simple metro that just has 4 stops. Customers have needs. They have business models they want to do business through. There's technology that can meet that need, and there's data that's required in order to make that happen. Expertise in any one of these is not alone enough to solve the situation. We heard from the Fujitsu CTO, Dr. Joseph, that customers are where you should start, and businesses, and what the problem is before you pick your technology. But at the same time, unless you have domain expertise sharing across these, it's so hard to get at the value. And so what I think occurs is that data, technology, and customer needs are wrapped in one, and we need to get to them at the core. And I think a paramount example of doing that well is an entrepreneurial individual that I've had the privilege to meet and work with on some basis. I don't know if you know the individual named Terry Jones. Very plain-spoken name, very plain-spoken gentleman. He was at American Airlines and was the core of the team that moved them to create the Sabre ticketing system and the reservation system that started to be used by the rest of the travel industry and the airlines. He actually was a super strong proponent of electronic tickets, but before that was implemented, he left there, and he also went to Travelocity to take advantage of a new technology paradigm that hit to another customer latent need, their self-service. They didn't want to go to a travel broker. They would go to the web now that the web came out. And Terry is very insightful. That company was sold for billions of dollars, and he moved on then to co-found Kayak, which is a comparison site across multiple airlines, multiple travel choices. So he advanced from just a single ticketing and reservation system to an industry-wide ticketing and reservation system, to one that was opened up to the web to allow customers to buy, to one that allowed them to compare. That last company, Kayak, had 200 people and sold for over $1 billion with just 200 people. It's pretty striking, but it evidences that this value chain, this metro between these points, if they can be connected and aligned, can create exceptional value. My second framework gets to a little bit of what we talked before. This was my joke about getting naked. If you missed that session, catch up with someone else. The disruptor always has that choice, because the disruptor on the left here doesn't really have a whole bunch of internal systems. They start from ground zero. They start naked. They get to choose what they build on, what clothes they put on, what systems they add, what customers they're going after. They're not encumbered by their past. And the reason why I suggested we'd think like that is because many of us are more in the incumbent position, and we have to compete and thrive in a world that's under this relentless change, and digitization is making that more and more important. As incumbents, the lowest hanging fruit is often our internal systems and our internal employees and our internal processes. They're inside the company. They're inside our customers' control. There's priorities and efficiencies. We can prove an ROI much more cleanly. If we can take out steps in a process or cost in a process, we can be heroes. This is the easiest step, and so we often spend a disproportionate amount of time on that, on cost management. But one cannot solely cut costs on the way to being relevant, as all this change is occurring around. And in fact, that's why moving down to the customer experiences is where this human-centric innovation and where capturing the value of this metro with the data, the business systems, the processes that the customer needs becomes more valuable. It's more risky, but it's more valuable. And then lastly, if you go down to the new industry opportunity, that can be really hard because you can't miss on that metro stop. Terry Jones had to line up all of those pieces. The changes happening around us, there may not be full believers in the system internally. There may not be full sets of information across all the pieces. But as the incumbent, that new industry opportunity is out there waiting. And if one doesn't take the digitization tools and piece together a recipe for success, then one has a higher likelihood of being on that chart that falls off from the league tables. And IT and IT partners have a very powerful role they can play to help people get here. And so with that, I think that all sectors are under pressure here to deliver not just immediate ROI on costs, but to innovate and find new ways to serve their customers and compete in industries that are evolving. So the last of the three frameworks I want to highlight here is around this digitization and how it demands then what I call a data fabric. A data fabric at NetApp is considered when people are using and controlling their data and governing their data and its usage, where it resides in terms of data residency requirements, where regulatory requires it to go, but also getting it to the point with some agility where it can have the highest business impact. As they're going through these iterations, as you're going through and trying to manage costs, as you're going through and trying to manage new business opportunities, empowering the organization with a data fabric can help them focus on the areas that are the value add and not the part that they need to leverage and borrow and rely on trusted partners for. And so, we see private cloud being a key piece of that. We're seeing people being able to connect to hyperscale cloud providers, whether it's Amazon, Azure, Google, SoftLayer, Ali Cloud with Aliun. You can pick your choice. But then there's cloud service providers that are going to also be important. Trusted partners that deliver different service level objectives than you can get out in the hyperscale cloud. Trusted partners that will help orchestrate this and enable people to be agile, enable people to capture the areas that are most poignant in their industry without so much worrying about the operations of some of the underlying fundamentals, and yet with the confidence that there's continued innovation enabled through this. This combination here matches up not only the NetApp belief in the data fabric, but we see a very strong parallel with how Fujitsu is bringing the MetaArc to market with hybrid cloud, hybrid IT, on-premise, the seamlessness across these different resources, and enabling good customers and your customers to focus on areas that they can further innovate and accelerate and be more closely tied to their customers and their customers' customers. I will share with you a story here, just because we're in Orlando, which I think dubs itself the theme park capital of the world. I've actually sat down in my role with a number of different customers around the world, but one of these meetings stands out as I came here today because it was with the executive team inside a theme park company of brand name. And I had the CIO and the head of SaaS applications and the head of security and the head of bespoke applications and the head of infrastructure all sitting in this room at the same time. And the conversation topic that arose that they really hadn't probably had the time to have together before was around what applications and what data should run where in these three clouds. They didn't have policies for it, and yet there were strong demands on the business. You can easily visualize this because if you're a theme park operator, you have a number of different pieces that are tugging at you. You have a business that in February might be much slower than it is between, say, Memorial Day and Labor Day in the summer. You could have a summer day where it starts off super sunshiny and then a thunderstorm rolls in and the park clears out. You could have employees that need to be notified to come to work because actually the thunderstorm that's predicted isn't coming and it's going to be a sunny day and we're going to have tens of thousands of more customers than we thought we were going to have. And when those customers come to the park, not only are you managing your employees, you're managing their profiles and their data. They might have a loyalty program, and in that loyalty program they might know your credit card number, personally identifiable information about your family, information about the characters of the cartoon that you love, and that you would pay $20 to stand next to one of those favorite characters with your family and get a picture taken of. But you may be the type of family that doesn't come to that park every month, every year, every 5 years. It might be a once-in-a-lifetime visit for your family to that park. And so if you walk in and have either a bad experience, your personally identifiable information or your credit card gets taken, or you don't get to get that picture with that character, you represent a revenue stream for that company that goes far into the future and extends far beyond just you in that incident that could be lost. So they need to be able to have For example, tablets that have information with personal information that has loyalty programs and preferences so they can capture that revenue opportunity and capture that experience for customers in the park. They may need to have SaaS applications that allow their employees know when to show up and to work on a very variable level. They may need to have integrations with other information systems. And yet some of the information they want to hold tight in a private cloud. Folks like NetApp and Fujitsu, I think, are figuring out how to help customers do this in all types of industries. It's finance, agriculture, utilities, retail. I've seen so many. So where do we get now? I would hypothesize that data are the crown jewels. So I'm going to share one last customer example and close out with digitization and then share with you an inspirational quote. The customer example here is the Denver Broncos, Super Bowl champs this year. Many of you probably didn't know their journey started much longer ago, but one part of it this year is they deployed this data fabric. They deployed it, and with NetApp, they were able to take information in training camp and have it available at training fields. They'd have that same information available for players to read playbooks at home. They'd have that same information available for them to look at film inside Invesco Mile High Stadium. They had that same information that they could take on the road when they played teams, when they went to the championship, and when they went to the Super Bowl in California, and when they won. And so they were changing their industry by having information available at their fingertips like it was not available a mere 2 years ago. Led to a championship. You can see the press release just this week how they used NetApp to achieve this with the draft, with agile decisions. So digitization is presenting us with a whole new world of opportunity. The interrelationship between technology and business decisions is all the more important. They reinforce each other, and the information has to flow across them. And the combinations can really change the balance of power and determine victory for each of us. The change is fast, and it will be perilous for the slow or indecisive. We should build, borrow, acquire recipes to win, and be adaptable. We should focus on customers and the data necessary to help them get to the next frontier and ourselves. We should anticipate the value of digitization, whether we are small or big. We should put in place a powerful data fabric, hybrid IT. So working with NetApp and Fujitsu, we think we can take you there. I'm a subscriber to the human-centric innovation. And so right now I'm going to draw from a quote from the founder and CEO of Under Armour, who went from basically a nobody in the sportswear category and built up a global brand. If you look it up today, it's a $17 billion market cap. They've signed signature players like Stephen Curry of the Warriors, MVP. They've signed Bryce Harper of baseball fame as being spokespersons. But also importantly, this last year they had 2 billion digital interactions with their customers. And you know what they're using them for? Exactly what this quote is. To create products you don't even know you need yet. It's a fantastic focus on customers. I'll leave that with you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the chance to speak with you. Hopefully this gives you further passion around your journey, because we are the ones who are going to change the world. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Beautiful. I'll take that from you. I'm going to jump straight now to our final speaker to just close today off, Alex Attal. Let me see if this can go on. Beautiful. Alex Attal. But before he comes onto stage, thank you, NetApp, for speaking. Also, thank you for your donation of the Disney tickets. We did email everyone who had won one of the tickets. Some of those folks were unable to make it. So we're actually going to extend the list. We've got it right here. I know some of you are here. I've seen you making on the list. I'm going to come hunt you down, or get Mitzi to hunt you down as well. And then we'll email those of you who we can't find and let you know you've won these. So we've extended the list to get a few folks out there. But if you think you might be one of the early Reggies, come and hunt one of us down, and we'll let you know if you are. Alex, please, EVP of the BAS Services Group here at Fujitsu America, please join me on the stage. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So now I know why I was asked to close this session. After you, Joseph, Jorgen, I'm the only Fujitsu executive with a perfect American accent. It's true. And first, to thank everybody for joining. They asked me to conclude this event. And I said, how am I going to conclude? It's kind of a little arrogant to think that I can give a conclusion after such great speakers like Joseph Roger, John, incredible speech. It's a good thing I'm originally from France, you got it, and we have a good relationship with arrogance, so I will try to, to still give some thought. So I will end up, I have only 3 slides, and just to share a few thoughts about what we learned today, and then we're gonna all join for a drink on the other room. Who in this room was working in 1990? Almost all of us. In 1990, the 3 biggest companies in the US were in Detroit. They are the combined market cap of $36 billion, generating $250 billion of revenue, and employing 1.2 million people. 2 years ago, the 3 biggest companies in the US were in the Silicon Valley. Market cap 1.1 trillion, 30 times the market cap of the 3 biggest companies 24 years ago. Exactly the same revenue, so it's very strange, 247 billion, employing 120,000 people. 10 times less people employed in those companies, 30 times more value created. So during our working lifetime, and in fact, only during part of our working lifetime, because we're not done yet. So the first idea, the first thought is, everything we heard today was about change. The change is here, that's obvious. The change is very fast. And in fact, one of the speakers we had at the Fujitsu Lab event a couple of months ago was saying that the reason is because now the technology is making the change exponential, not linear anymore. For the last 200 years or whatever the time, evolution was linear, and now it's exponential. And just the effect of being exponential is driving those type of changes. So that's the first thought that we all need to have is, it's not only changing, it's changing so damn fast. So, we better all, we're all awake, but in 2 years when approval is going to come back, I'm pretty sure the world will be already different. The second thought is a lot of what we heard today is that this digital disruption is changing the go-to-market. It's changing the go-to-market for us. It's probably changing the go-to-market for you with your customers. And it was presented in very different ways, but we all said the same thing. We used to sell product. And then we moved a few years ago selling solutions. Oh, we don't sell product anymore. Not the customer, they want a solution. Now, we have to learn about co-creating, co-innovating, co-creating market, because on the connected services. So the example that Joseph Roger presented this morning about HEM, where we're selling this enhanced analytic solution, I can tell you, HEM didn't ask us, what's the server behind the proposal? What is the software? They don't care. They just care about what is the outcome, how am I going to digitalize and track all the data. So we're not in the market of selling product. We're not in the market of selling solution anymore. We are in the market of co-creating businesses with our customer or with our prospect. And it changed completely the approach. So I took some of the quote from our friends in the UK. We said, we have to now think big and start small and do those POCs and start completely differently, learn fast, maybe fail, try again, always thinking big, and then make sure we can scale quickly. So that's the second idea that is completely going to change our relationship. And the third one is a belief I have for some time, is that the competitive criteria are changing. We heard a lot about innovation, disruptive, and all the changes on the way we provide offering. I think the winner in the marketplace, in our market, in your market, are the companies that will bring those 2 ingredients. Services excellence, and innovation. And if you bring only one of them, you're going to be out of market. So you can do a great job on services. If somebody's going to come to your customer with a disruptive innovation, they will take you out. But if they come only with a disruptive innovation and do not know how to serve and have high quality of excellence, same story. They will be out, and the company driving the excellent services will come back in. So this is the goal we have with Fujitsu, is to bring together the services excellence I believe we had for many years and bring this innovation and disruptive solution that will help our customer move and transform their business. So those are my 3 ideas. I'm done. Just wanted to use this. When I thought about what I would say and I thought about this co-creation, I went back into this tagline that Fujitsu created 7 or 8 years ago. And I thought, wow, that was really visionary. You know, because we said, shaping tomorrow with you. That means the only way we can move forward and progress is with our customer. So the role of a customer, the role of our prospect in this new market is becoming way more important, and that we have to build solutions, define what is the outcome, and then provide the technology that will bring you there. So with this, I want to thank you again. I've been asked to say that we had a record attendance in this session. 365 people attended this session, so congratulations and thank you. We had 63 expert talks. I hope you enjoyed 63. So your appraisal, Jürgen, will be up this year. That was really great. So I really want to thank you. As I said, everything is about partnering, talking. So we're going to continue the conversation. By chance, this event happened on May 5th. So we're going to now celebrate the Cinco de Mayo in the room next door. Thanks again for your participation.